and recognising that particularly in the last year that families will have encountered all kinds of different issues and questions. So we're going to go on a little bit of a learning journey over this next 90 minutes or so. And there are 3 steps along the route just to outline for you. So we're going to begin by exploring some of the features of what support can look like. We're going to consider how we might be able to make it relevant, bearing in mind the families that we know and work with, and what are some of the routes to providing support. And we'll, in the midst of all of that, have lots of opportunities to have conversations, to ask questions. I hope that you come into this learning setting knowing that you absolutely bring all of the wealth of your experience and knowledge into this space, and for the benefit of yourself and also for the benefit of everyone else who's here. I hope that you'll be able to take away some ideas and suggestions from one another that will help you to continue to develop good practice in the ministry that you're doing. And I also think it's really important to say at the outset to hold the families that you know in mind as we reflect on these things. So the families who are in your churches, maybe the families who are in your neighbourhood, keep thinking and reflecting on those people, because it's all about making sure that ministry is contextual and relevant for the people that we know and work with. I apologise that this is not going to be a passive session, so if you are hoping for a quiet evening of watching the screen, it's probably not going to be like that. We're going to do some interactive things, and I also want to introduce you to a couple of tools that I think are really helpful to use in virtual learning environments like this. They might be good things that you can go on and use in whatever work you're involved with. So my hope is that this is going to be an energizing time, and I hope that by the time we reach the end, you'll be ready for a good nap, but in a really good way, because you've had a kind of a brain workout through the course of what we've done together. So I want to say, really, why does support matter? Why would we even think about starting in this place? Well, life is often challenging. We will know that ourselves. Being a parent or a carer, raising a family of whatever form, juggling all the various demands of that can take its toll. Parenthood can sometimes be something that arouses a lot of guilt in adults. Sometimes adults may feel that they're inadequate or they're ill-equipped for the task. And for many parents, and I would class myself here as well, it just sometimes doesn't come naturally to raise children. And so we need to find methods that can extend our loving, supportive, and generous hands to those who need help around us. And I would particularly reflect that over this past year, the challenges that families have faced living through the pandemic have put an enormous strain on them, and they've experienced lots of new and untold pressures. So even more so at this time, I think there is a need for the church to come alongside families, to be caring of them, to be welcoming of them, for them to know that the church is there for them, not only perhaps when life is good, when everything is going great, but also when it is tough and they are finding it difficult. So in my book, I define family support through this phrase, which is that family support is about seeking to promote parenting confidence, increase self-esteem, and nurture relationships between parents and children. And in other words, I believe that everything boils down to those relationships. It highlights the heart of what we hope to do. So we want to raise everyone's sense of connection to each other in their household, and also to raise their well-being as a whole. We hear an awful lot in politics and in the media about troubled families, about dysfunctional families. And I think there is a place for the church to come and say, family really matters. Let's invest and encourage and support them so that they can be the best family they can. So the first tool that we're going to use is something called Mentimeter, and I'm going to take us through this nice and steadily, so hopefully it won't be too challenging. So we're going to use this tool. Let me just find the screen and share it with you. So you're going to need to open another browser, or you can just do this directly on your phone. It's just, okay. Here it comes. Okay. It was just taking its time. So if you go to www.menti.com, and it will ask you for a code, and the code is at the top of the screen there. So the code is 68960947. And I'm going to invite you to enter 2 or 3 words which come to mind that you think really matter in relationships. And I'm thinking not only about couples in relationships, in romantic relationships, I'm thinking about all those relationships that can exist across families. So between siblings, or between parents, or wider extended family. So what do you think is a word that might describe one thing that really matters? You can type that word into menti.com, and if you can't do it, pop your word into chat, and hopefully Stephen or I will be able to add those for you. And in a moment or two, we will hopefully start to see all of our words gathering on this page. So I'm just going to give you a few moments to find your way to menti.com, pop the code in, and then start typing in a word or two. Okay, here come the words. Brilliant. So I can see that people are writing trust and love. And the larger the word is, that indicates that more of you have used that word. So quite a few of us have said honesty. We've also mentioned quite a lot understanding, the importance of respect between people, the need to be caring, to be patient, and also to listen. If you've thought of other words, feel free to add those in. I think you get up to three turns. So Menti is a really good tool, and doing a word cloud like this can be a really great way to hear from people. If you're still doing things online with people, you can use it to help them contribute and to have their say. Brilliant. Just give you another moment or two. Brilliant. Thank you everyone for your contributions. Those are really, really helpful to see. Let's move on. So if we're recognizing that relationships are at the heart of offering support to people, and we mean the relationships between family members, and we also mean the relationships between us as people who are part of churches, but with also those people who are in our churches, but also out into our wider communities as well. So what are the features of support then? And I would like to suggest that there are 5 of these. And these features are really woven into what I would describe as kind of the fabric of what we do. So the way in which we approach our ministry, the work that we do, these things are all part and parcel of how we operate. And especially during these times, it's really important to consider how we might be able to offer these in light of circumstances around COVID and a pandemic. And And also, how might these things help or impede what we're trying to do? Are we discovering new methods of support that maybe we've overlooked in the past? So let's take each of these bullet points one by one. And the first one talks about the need for us to be family centered, which means that we take the needs and the views of families seriously, and that's really what drives what we do. So when we start to sit down and ask questions around what we might be able to offer families, we think about or we take into consideration the kinds of families that we're working with, that we know that are part of our church or in our communities. And we think about the kind of lifestyles perhaps that they have. So do people generally work locally? Have we got lots of commuters? Are there groups of people who are unemployed? Have we got lots of families with two parents? Have we got extended families locally? Have we got single parent families? Have we got families of different faith groups and traditions? All of those things need to feature when we're starting to think about what support might look like, because it really does matter to tailor things to what people need. So that's a really good place to start. If you're thinking about doing something new, if actually coming out of the pandemic, you're beginning to think that maybe you would like to try and do some new outreach or mission and ministry to families, really begin by looking very carefully at who the families are in your neighbourhood, because you want to make sure that it's going to work for them. Families where there are commuting parents may struggle, for instance, if you say that we're going to do something at 6 o'clock in the evening. If people are arriving home from work, that time may not work for lots of people. So it's about thinking about those kinds of factors. The second bullet is about signposting. And this is really about the information that we share, the information that we offer to people, that families may need because perhaps they don't know how to access benefits. They may not know how to access other services that are available to them locally. And so as people in church, what we can do is go out and learn a lot about what is on offer locally. So maybe if we have conversations with our local schools or with the GP surgeries, maybe we can also have conversations with our local councils to find out more about what services there are that people might need. And sometimes it can be really useful to kind of keep that in a folder, or to create a folder on your laptop or something, so that you've got those details, because you can guarantee that if you're in a moment where you're having a conversation with a family and they say, actually, we really value some information about this, it's going to take quite a lot of time to access perhaps exactly what you need. But if some of that work is done beforehand, it means that you're able to give a much more sort of instant response to those sorts of things. And of course, every community is going to have different things, and sometimes it can be really good to talk to other local churches to see what they know about, and try to sort of collate and bring all of that together so you've got that information to hand. The third bullet point is that support often works best when it is peer-led, and it recognises actually that families supporting each other can be quite transformative. So if we're thinking about bringing families together, perhaps there is a way in which they can look after or help one another in that process. Because sometimes our own experiences, when we've been through something, it can help other people who are facing a similar situation. And so we might want to try and have opportunities for people to share some of their story. I think quite often in this ministry, we find ourselves chatting to people. You get to learn lots of things about people's history, about the things that they've been through. And so actually sometimes that can really help us to say, well, do you know what? There's another family I know of, and they might really appreciate hearing from you because you've been there, you've walked in their shoes. And that means that actually their stories are going to marry together much more easily. As people working with families, we don't need to be the experts, but actually we need to have some of these tools and some of these ways of working which are going to be useful for people. Fourthly, we need to think about accessibility. And we might think on one level that's purely about physical accessibility in terms of people's additional needs. Sometimes, obviously, those things can limit someone's participation, but it is also about the way in which we communicate and way we model inclusive practice. When we did the We Are Family research report a few years ago, we discovered that there are all these different kinds of families that are engaging in the life of the church in all kinds of different ways across the United Kingdom. And so if for some of those families, they may feel that they would not get a welcome in church. And so there's something really important for us if we're able to use language which is inclusive, that actually that may really help families to feel that they are seen and that it's okay to come to church as the family that they are. That there isn't any expectation in that church to come as somehow being the perfect or the ideal family. Goodness knows, none of us have ever kind of sorted that. That's impossible. But actually, it's okay to come as a family that you are. I think sometimes, some of our language might give us away. I'm acutely aware that I have often in the past talked always of mums and dads. And that says one particular message to people. If they hear me say that, they may assume that that's the only audience that I'm talking to. And so perhaps there's a way in which if we start to talk about parents or carers, mums, dads, granddads, or whatever, that we can start to create this sense that there are more kinds of families, and those families are all very much welcome in this place. I would suggest that if you want to have conversations around the kinds of families that your church may be encountering and welcoming, that you might want to think about using these. This is a set of coasters that we developed. There are 12 coasters because we talked about the fact that there were 12 different kinds of families that were mentioned. You can get these during the breakout room. I'll put details for you into the chat. But basically, there's a question on the back of each of the coasters. So you get a little image on the front. This is the one that I'm closest to because one of our children has left home, one's still here, so we're almost empty nesters. And then on the back of the coaster, there is a question to discuss, and you can have really good conversations in your churches about different kinds of families using these. And so the question says, how might family life change for parents when grown-up children leave home? And we can encourage everybody to think more about the different kinds of family by using those questions. And then finally, the last bullet point here talks about, of course, that important spiritual dimension, which is that our support and our ministry is God-inspired. All roads, all of our offers, all of what we offer comes back to the fact that we believe that God is here to transform us, to know us, to be in relationship with us. And so we want to make sure that we invite God to dwell in all that we do, all that we offer. We want God to move. We want to join in with whatever God is doing. So if you're aware locally, I think this is a really good idea that if you're aware that there might be something happening locally to your church where there's a lot of engagement with it, that people are taking part, that they're enjoying it, is there a way for the church to get on board? Because that might be something that God is stirring up, that God is bringing some life to. And if that's the case, if we've prayed about it, that maybe we can join in and be part of that as well. So it may be that it's not for work for us to start and get off the ground. It might be that God is calling us to join in with something elsewhere. So I'm going to give you a moment or two. I've whizzed through those 5 bullet points. And I wonder which one for you has particularly struck a chord. Is there one that you feel actually that's going to be a real priority for me at the moment? Which one might it be? So just reflect on your own situation, the families you know. Which one do you think you would want to spend a bit more time focusing on? On the Zoom screen, hopefully you'll be able to see at the top that there is the little pen or pencil symbol and it says annotate underneath it. I'm going to invite you to click on that and you should see another little menu appear, and there are some shapes, and you can either write, so you could do a little tick next to the one that you're choosing, or you could do a little stamp next to it. I think there are hearts, there are stars, whichever one you want to choose. But it would be interesting for me to see which one you're going to pick as the one that you feel is a priority for you. So thank you, Mayuk. Thank you, Becky. If you can't, feel free to just pop your answer into the chat. You might just want to say the first one. Thank you, John. Fantastic. Thank you. And I can see some of you in the chat have said accessibility as well. So there's a real mix actually of the ones that we feel are important, and that's absolutely fine, because different ones are going to make a difference for us in terms of where we find ourselves. And it's just worth saying that I say more about these things in my book, so I've given us a little bit of a taster of those things, but there is more in the chapter in my book about support. So let's move on and think now about how we make support meaningful and relevant as well. Now, do I need to clear annotate, Stephen? I'm just wondering.
Yeah, you should. Can you just, if you click clear on, I might be able to do it. Let me just see.
Oh, they've gone. They've gone. Brilliant. Thank you. That's awesome. So what's really important is that actually any support that we offer, any way in which we reach out to people, is going to be meaningful, and also it's going to be relevant. And so there are 3 ways in which I think we can approach doing this. So some of what we do might have a very formal setting. So for instance, a church service is quite a formal setting. Some of us may have been on courses. Again, that's quite a formal situation to be in. But there are also very informal ways in which we can kind of offer support. You can kind of have much more informal, say, meetups with people if you sort of gathered in a coffee bar, or if you sort of said, oh, we're just going to meet in the park and you're welcome to bring your lunch with you and we're going to have a conversation over lunch. That would be a much more informal example. So formal tends to lead towards very more structured education, I would describe it as, whereas informal ways of offering support can tend to be better if we're trying to enhance friendships, or if we want to create better bonds between people. So we do formal things together when we perhaps want to do some learning, but maybe the informal lends itself better to when we want to build friendships or relationships. Sometimes we might find that actually we can gather people around a shared interest or a shared need. And that can be something which acts as a real glue to hold people together, because if we've got something in common, we all know this, that it's often much more engaging and easier and more interesting to spend time with other people. And I know, for instance, a church that I worked with at the start of this year, they had decided that actually they were going to offer, alongside some very well-established small groups that they have, they were going to introduce some termly ones. And these were groups they were just going to offer for a short period of time, so that people could come and meet some new people, but just spend about 3 or 4 months getting to know one another. And then the group would naturally come to an end, and then there would be some new choices. And what I liked about some of those was that they were intergenerational settings. And so, for instance, there was one which was going to be a weekend cycling group. And they were going to suggest to people, come, bring your bikes. We're going to go on a bit of a cycling trip in the local area, and anyone can come and take part in that. And so the focus was that those people all enjoyed cycling and being on their bikes. That was a good reason to come together. but it also meant that they could have other wider conversations about other things in the course of them spending those couple of hours together. I think they decided to do it late on a Sunday afternoon. That worked best for those people. And then thirdly, being aware of the ages and stages of the people that we're wanting to support or care for, or provide some sort of pastoral provision in some way. Because depending on the ages and stages, that will impact on the times and the availability that people have. What works perhaps for people who have got very young children may not suit people who've got teenagers, for instance. I know that when my husband and I have two boys. When they hit their teenage years, often they were all up quite a lot later than I ever was, and they were always ready for conversations at about 11 o'clock at night when I was very tired and wanting to head off to bed. And so we had to try to find some middle ground in some of those things. I kind of hope that we sort of made our way through there somehow. I also think that equally, if we bring different generations together, that could be really beneficial if we're looking to help people have a sense of support from others. There is nothing like, in my experience, having conversations with people who've been maybe slightly ahead of me on the parenting journey. And so people perhaps who had children in the next stage. So when I had a young family, some friends of ours who had children who were at primary school gave me a little bit of a glimpse into what the next stage was going to look like. And I really appreciated hearing from them about how they were doing family life, what mattered, how they made it work. And that's, with a few of my friends, that's remained the case all through our lives. And so when I found it particularly difficult when our boys became teenagers, I found myself in an all-male household, that there were other friends that I could talk to about, okay, how do I do this parenting thing now? Because I feel a little bit out of my depth. And because their children were a good 5 years older than ours, it was really helpful to learn stuff from them and to share stories and ways in which we tried things out. And I think often those environments help people to feel very empowered and very able to share honestly about what they're experiencing. Sometimes if somebody sort of stood at the front, that sense of being the expert can mean that other people feel silenced. And so that whole peer-led thing can really make a difference. So 3 things there that I think we perhaps need to bear in mind if we want things to be meaningful and relevant. We're going to go out into breakout rooms, and you're going to have a chance to talk about everything that we have considered so far. And there are these questions for you to reflect on. Now, I'm not guessing that you're going to be able to do all of these by any stretch in 10 minutes. So it may be that you pick 1 or 2 that you want to talk about, but just take a couple of these on and reflect about some of what we've looked at so far. So firstly, have a chat about what support maybe you have offered in the past. What has worked, what hasn't worked. You might want to reflect a bit on those 3 points about the kind of support, in terms of whether you think that formal or informal is useful. What do you think about gathering people around shared interests? What about those ages and stages? What might you have to say about that? What might you consider doing differently? If you have done something before, how might it look maybe as we emerge out of this time of pandemic? And which one of those perhaps could make the biggest difference? It's a very open conversation. It's entirely up to you to how you pursue that. And we're just going to put a very short 5-minute break on the end of that. So you're actually going to have 15 minutes to talk. If you want to, for those last 5 minutes, take a quick break away from the screen, please feel free to do so. Go and check in on the football score if you need to. Go and grab a drink, stretch your legs, and then we will come back, I think, at, let me work that out, at 5 to 8. Is that all right? 7:55 or 7:50? 7:55. We're going to move on in this last half an hour to think about something that I describe as being roots into support, and that's ROUTES. So let me get my PowerPoint back up again. So when we're talking about routes into support, this is around how we tailor what we offer depending on the different ages and stages that people are at. Reflecting what we touched on briefly before, which is that families at different points will have different needs, that different things will be important to them, their lifestyle will look different. Children perhaps who are younger are in bed earlier, so they're having meal times maybe in different ways. So there's all kinds of different factors at work here that is really important for us to be aware of. And it's also worth knowing, obviously, that families don't necessarily always transition kind of very neatly from one into another. And it may well be due to the nature of family form that perhaps people who were maybe empty nesters, if a couple divorces, sometimes they may find themselves into a new relationship where there are children. And so we don't necessarily have this very linear journey for families who start off in the early years and end up kind of at that neat kind of grandparenting point. But sometimes people kind of circle around, people spiral around, they come back because relationships break down and because they enter new relationships, that they're in all kinds of different stages of family life at different points. And some people may have adult children, but if they're in a new relationship, they may have younger children. This adds to the complexity of family life as we know it in Britain today. And if we're alert to that, though, it can really help us as we're thinking about work and life. One thing I think is really crucial in the middle of this, and in the centre of the slide, you can see is the word singles, because I want us to be alert to the fact that, of course, single people feature in this landscape. And I wouldn't want us to neglect them or omit them, but to recognise that single people very much feature in family life. And although they may not necessarily be biologically related, they can experience a sense of family because they have connections to others in the church, in the community. They may actually live in households which act as family for them. And so if we're kind of aware of that, then actually it hopefully offers us a way to include them so that single people don't feel as though they are kind of on the margins of anything that happens with families, that actually they are included, that there is an important place for them. I mentioned earlier about the fact that the transition stages for families are often the times that cause the most pressure, and that causes pressure between relationships. So if there are, say, two adults who are parenting in a household, if the dynamics of parenting those children change, that may cause, tensions or pressures on people's relationships. And so it's always worth being aware when families are kind of entering those times. So for instance, when children get into about sort of year 6 at primary school, that's a really big change for children. I think it often has a lot of impact on families at home as they're preparing for high school. And so it's really worth thinking about, or maybe just doing like Mayuk was doing, just having those moments to say, can I just pop around and have a chat? Just love to hear how you're getting on, to know whether or not they're finding that point difficult, and if there's a way in which we can support. In the same way, I sometimes think that when children become teenagers, some parents can really feel that they have kind of lost their bearings. And sometimes we can find that we've got comfortable to being a family during a particular period of life together, but when things change, maybe when an older child goes off to college or university or leaves home, our children become teenagers, when children are no longer toddlers, when they go off to school, that these things raise lots of questions for us as the adults. And they raise questions in terms of how best do we parent or care for those people, but they also raise questions about, am I doing this very well? Am I doing my best? Am I making mistakes? Is there a better way of doing this? And I think if there is a way to hear those things, to give people opportunities to voice those things, it can really help build confidence and well-being, because sometimes if we know that others are finding it difficult, that just helps us to know that it's normal, that it's human to experience this. In my experience, when my boys became teenagers, I often found myself standing on the sideline of a football pitch. So both of my boys enjoyed playing football. My youngest son particularly was always at training on a Wednesday evening with matches on a Sunday. And when I wasn't in church, if I was taking him to football, I really found that when I was stood there during the match, I had the most amazing conversations with other parents about their kids. And so here we were, all parents of boys in a football team, with nowhere else to talk about our parenting. Because, of course, once your kids are at high school, there's no school gate. You can't hang around. Well, if you do hang around at the school gate and you've got teenagers, that's a little bit odd. But you've got nobody really to talk to share some of the struggles if you've found it hard to get your kid out of bed that morning, or if they're perhaps not eating very well, or if they're not sleeping very well. How and where do they go to share and talk about some of those things? I did it with other parents on the touchline of a football pitch, and that really became very important to me, that I had that weekly point of contact where we could all kind of have a bit of a moment, maybe to roll our eyes and say, oh gosh, they drive us nuts sometimes. But that can be really helpful as parents to do it. And so I wonder, in your community, for instance, where those spaces might be. Do those spaces exist for people? Can we help to create them so people can be having those conversations with each other? Because provision, whatever we offer, needs to be based on what we know that family need, but it also needs to be dependent on us listening well to those families and those parents. And so we need to be asking them, we need to be saying, tell me about what life has been like for you lately. And I think particularly coming out of the pandemic, there is going to be a huge amount of need for us to listen really, really well, to just hold open space for people to say, tell me what it's been like for you, and to just let people talk. And in many instances, that may be the best gift that we can actually offer to people, because there will have been lots of things that have happened behind closed doors that people may not feel able or want to or know how to talk about or share. And so we need to try and think about what safe spaces look like to do some of that sharing. So when we're thinking about these routes into support, our best approach is always to involve families, to ask their opinion, invite them in to speak into and shape whatever it is that we're considering, that we're planning, whatever form that's going to take. And we can easily miss that step. And I have been guilty of this on occasion. I have a great idea, I run too far ahead, I start making plans for it. And before you know it, by the next day, I've got the venue sorted, I've sorted the time and the refreshments or whatever, without actually stopping and having those conversations. So I'd really urge you to just consult, to spend time talking to families first, because sometimes they don't then engage and we wonder why that is. And I think maybe we just miss out that step of actually talking to them in the first place. Now we're going to try to use another tool now, which is something called Jamboard, which I don't know if you've come across. There's a link to it in the bottom, and I think Stephen's hopefully going to post the link into the chat for you. When you click on that link, it will take you to this, and I'm hopefully going to be able to share what you will see. Bum, 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 bum. Okay, bear with 1 moment. Okay. So when you click on the link, hopefully it will bring you to this, which is a Jamboard. If we were together in person, I would have used some flip chart paper and we would have done this exercise with you contributing things. Instead, you get virtual post-it notes. So on the left-hand side, there is a menu, and just below the arrow in the circle is something called a sticky note. And if you click on it, one pops up and you can type on it and save it, and then it appears on the Jamboard. So just have a go at using it and put a little message or something to everybody. You can also click on them and move them around. And you can also make them bigger and smaller by clicking on the corners. Someone's worked out that you can spin them around. Excellent.
What you may need to do as well to get onto the Have a Go page, it's number 5 at the top. So there'll be on the website, at the top in the middle, I think you'll click on it, it'll say 1-5. And then if you click the arrows onto 5-5, that's for everyone else. When I clicked on it, it went to 5-5, 1-5 rather than 5-5.
Yes, please come to 5-5 because this is our test page. But it was an afterthought rather than my first thought, unfortunately.
Because I see, yeah, there's quite a few people put one on 1-5, which then we won't see on the share screen.
Ah, cool. So some people are also writing, so you can use the pen, which is at the top to write. I'm going to encourage you to use the post-it notes if that's possible. If you make a mistake and you want to get rid of something, you can delete. There's also an erase button, so you can erase it afterwards. Okay. Are we semi-confident? Or are we still? We need a bit more practice. There's lots of intense concentration I can see going on. Okay. So we're going to have a go. I'm just going to move us through. So there are 4 boards here. We're probably not going to get time to do them all this evening. We're just going to have a go at doing one. And we're going to think about families who have children who are in those primary years. So children perhaps who are about 5 to 11 in a family. And what I'm going to suggest you do is just pop on here ideas that you think can support families at this stage of life. And it might be that it's something that you've done before. It might be something that you've heard somebody else has done. You may have heard about it from somewhere else entirely. But the question is, what have you offered or what would you like to offer to support families at this stage of life? And we're thinking from a church perspective. So grab a post-it, click on a post-it and type some thoughts, and we will see them all gradually appear. Messy church. I mean, yes, of course, messy church. And you can do as many as you like. There's no limit here. You can just keep on posting stuff until we've covered the board. Yes, and it has a habit jam board. If it will just post it on top of one before, so they do need moving around so that we can see them all. So you've got a couple more minutes if there's anything else that you'd like to add. If you're done, feel free to give me a thumbs up. We could always look at another one. And of course, if you feel like you've finished with this primary years one, you can click through at the top here to the next one. And the next board is for families with teenage children. So you could go and add some things on there if you want to. So we can have another minute or so of popping things onto the Jamboard. And you'll have access to this after this evening. You can go back, you could add extra things to it after this evening if you want to. You might be able to come back and take a look and get inspired and think, oh, that's prompting some possibilities for me that you'd not considered before. Okay. I'm just going to take a look at the next one. So some people have started to put some things on there. We are going to go into a final conversation in the next 5 minutes, and you may want to ask each other about some of the things that you've seen on the post-it notes. You may want to see if anyone in your group put that on a post-it note. You want to ask them more about it. So for instance, whoever put picnic praise outdoor service on, you may want to share a bit more about what that was, what did you do, what happened, how did people respond. But you can have a conversation about what is on the Jamboard. And we're only going to do this for 5 minutes so that we can come back at 25 past just to close. So we're going to open breakout rooms. I shall stop sharing. You will still obviously be able to see the Jamboard once you're in your breakout groups. So there are just a few closing thoughts really to share with you that I think are important. One is around the importance of developing transparency and openness with people and a sense of honesty. We don't have all the answers, and it seems such an obvious thing to say, but we just don't have all of the answers. Sometimes the best that we can offer to people is to be a listening ear, and there is nothing wrong in that. If we've got 10 minutes to listen to somebody, to perhaps just be a bit of a shoulder for someone, then we're possibly providing just what they need in that moment. So I encourage all of us never to sort of make out in any way that we have it all sorted, that we know exactly what we're doing. It's okay to admit to making mistakes, to getting things wrong. I think that always helps us to build really authentic relationships with people. And I think sometimes that's particularly hard when we're working in churches, because I think the kind of drive to come looking as though we've got everything together can be very, very strong. But it's okay sometimes to turn up at church and say, do you know what, my kids were absolutely driving me mad this morning, or whatever it is. If something has happened, if you've had a disagreement with someone, whatever it might be, let's just live very authentically with people. The second point is around how we measure success, and I'm very aware that in church environments we have a tendency to measure success with numbers, and so we might do something and we say things such as, oh, but only 3 people turned up, and we sometimes assume that if not many people come and take part, that means that something hasn't been worthwhile, it hasn't worked, it hasn't been important somehow. And so we can measure success in other ways, actually. And if we have had 3 people come, if those people have benefited, if there has been some difference made in the lives of those people, then what we have done has been worthwhile. So I really encourage us to, when we reflect on what has happened, to think about other ways in which it might have had an impact besides counting people, because I don't think that always tells us the whole story. And I think it can be really good to reflect on other ways of doing that. And of course, to prayerfully approach everything. So when we're thinking around new ideas, when we're planning, when we're on the brink maybe of starting something new, if we're deciding to stop something, that we're not going to do that anymore. And I have a sense that lots of churches at this moment in time are saying, do you know what, we're not going to do things like that anymore. We're going to try doing it like this instead. Let's bring all of that to God. Let's prayerfully approach everything. Let's invite God to be part of what we're doing, to be engaged in prayer, and ask God to just be with us as we walk through all the different things that we do. And just a closing prayerful activity for all of us now, because as we've been reflecting this evening, I'm sure that you have been thinking about families in your church, in your streets, maybe in your own family, maybe families that you've not seen for a while, families that you're missing. And I wonder who's on your mind today. And so we're just going to have a few moments of quiet. I invite you to prayerfully uplift those people to God, to ask God to come and meet with them, to be present with them, and to bless all of those people that we know. So let's just hold silence for a few moments. And all God's people said, Amen. It's been a real joy to spend time with you this evening. It's been really great to see you all, and I hope that there's something that you can take away which is going to inform whatever it is that you do, or however you're approaching your work. It would be remiss of me if I didn't put at the end of this session a really big plug in for my book, because I wrote it to be useful to people, and it's always a joy for me to hear that people are finding it useful, and that's my only hope with what I've written, is that it is useful to people, that they open it and read it and find things in there which encourage and inspire and help them develop work in their own place. And so you can get hold of my book obviously from BRF, who publish it. You can also get hold of it obviously from other kind of booksellers and other sort of giants of the retail online world, wherever you wish to order stuff from. There are 7 habits of highly effective ministry, in my view, and it's all based on my own experience. And those 7 habits are, let me just read through them all because I always forget one of them. I should know these things by now. So there are 7 habits. One is about being strategic, be supportive, be collaborative, be intergenerational, be missional, be holy at home, and be reflective. And I hope that there is content there which can really prove valuable to you in whatever it is that you're doing. It's been lovely to be with you tonight.